In this episode of the Chillinois podcast, I sit down with Justin Leiby. If you'd like to see the video version of this episode of the Chillinois podcast, we have pasted a direct link to the video version in the show notes for this episode. Justin is an associate professor of accountancy at the Geese College of Business at the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. I first became aware of Justin via an Al Jazeera interview. You might be familiar with this interview because we've shared and discussed it on this podcast in the past. In case you missed it, this interview was a follow-up to a documentary that was published by Al Jazeera Plus. The documentary was called Why It's So Hard to Sell Weed in Chicago, and, in my opinion, the documentary was highly informative. I recommend checking it out. We've pasted a link to this documentary in the show notes for this episode. As I said, I first became aware of Justin via an Al Jazeera interview.
On a broad basis, who this industry is attracting to work in, and that's being studied by a professor at the University of Illinois named Justin Leiby, and he sent us this video comment.
To overcome inequity and inequality, what the cannabis industry needs first and foremost is better data. I and a few others at Illinois have been working with state regulators on a broad data-driven view of equity. On the downside, we know that employees in general and ownership in particular is less racially diverse than it should be, but we're seeing encouraging things too. 1 in 6 employees in the Illinois cannabis industry identifies as LGBTQ, which is several times the national average. And knowing the industry attracts people who are often marginalized in our society, and better understanding what improves their working conditions can help make this an industry that's truly for everyone.
This interview was a follow-up to the Why It's So Hard to Sell Weed in Chicago documentary. Among other people, Danielle Perry, the Cannabis Regulation Oversight Officer for the state of Illinois, appeared in this interview. I recommend checking out the entire interview by Al Jazeera. I have pasted a link to the Al Jazeera interview that features Justin, Danielle, and others in the show notes for this podcast episode. We recently sat down with Danielle Perry for a conversation which we released as an episode of the Chillinois podcast. In case you missed it, we recently recorded and released a follow-up podcast to the conversation that we had with Danielle Perry. I recommend checking it out. I'll put a link to the original episode and the follow-up episode in the show notes for today's episode. In the follow-up episode, we read an email that we received from the CROO as a reply to follow-up questions that we had sent following our original interview. In the email, I asked about a diversity, equity, and inclusion study from what I understood was required by law. They told me that they would be working with the Geese College of Business at the University of Illinois to process the data that they've received to date. In the email that I received, the Office of the Cannabis Regulation Oversight Officer said that they are hopeful that they will release a complete report before the end of the fiscal year, which is June 30th. As you may know, we've traveled to the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign in the past. In case you missed it, last year we sat down with Dr. D.K. Lee, a professor of crop sciences at the university. D.K. and I connected because the university had recently announced that they'd be offering a course that covers the origin and history of cannabis production, taxonomy and classification, including subspecies and varieties, cannabis biology, cannabis products such as fibers, seed oils, cannabinoids, and essential oils, and production management, including indoor and large-scale field cultivation, diseases and pests, post-harvest management, and more. This class is also a part of a new cannabis certificate program that the University of Illinois offers. I'll paste a link to that episode in the show notes for this podcast episode. As mentioned earlier, the Geese College of Business have been hired to collect and analyze data about the cannabis industry in the state of Illinois. According to a press release from the state of Illinois, which I've linked in the show notes, the initiative, which is being led by Justin Leiby, the subject of today's interview, is designed to help shape the cannabis industry's diversity, equity, and inclusion and social regulatory policies. I reached out to Justin to see if he'd be interested in chatting with me, and he said sure. So I packed my things and made my way to the city of Champaign-Urbana for an in-person interview with Justin. I wanted to learn more about the study and hear some of the conclusions that can be drawn from the preliminary results. If you've never been, the campus for the University of Illinois is beautiful. The business instructional facility at the Gies College of Business is no exception. The state-of-the-art facility absolutely blew me away. I felt a little bit out of place in the facility, but nearby, in Justin's office, I felt right at home. Enjoy the episode. Hello, Chillinois. Today I'm returning to my alma mater, the University of Illinois, to talk to Justin Leiby. Hey, how's it going, Justin?
Great, thanks for having me.
By the way, I said that confidently. That's totally not true. I've just always wanted to say, I'm back here at my alma mater. So I checked that off my bucket list. I've not graduated anything but high school, but Justin, welcome to the Chillinois podcast. How are we doing today?
I'm doing great. You were very convincing. I believed it.
Yeah.
I thought to myself, I wonder, how did I not know he was an alum?
I believed it, but yeah, no, it's not true. But I said it, and that I was able to mark that off my bucket list, So, anyways, welcome to the show. Give people, and we just met too. So, introduce yourself to the audience of the Chillinois podcast, and I guess to me.
Sure. Well, my name's Justin. My favorite color is green. No coincidence whatsoever.
Yeah, you got the shirt on too.
Oh, yeah, actually, I do.
By the way, folks, chillinois.net/video. Hi, we're on video. So,
I'm an associate professor of accountancy at the Gies College of Business here at Illinois. I'm also what I guess we call a disruption and innovation scholar, which means on the downside, what it means is that I have extra responsibilities here. But the plus side is that I just get to do some cool things, particularly data science and technology driven, which has really given me the chance to work, particularly with our state government, but not just with them, on some interesting projects to help make, I think, the DEI initiatives, and in particular DEI initiatives.
What's DEI, real quick?
Oh, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Perfect.
In the state of Illinois, and in the state of Illinois cannabis industry to be more successful.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I was about to say, yeah, you not only work, all data is cool, but this data is pretty cool, right?
Yeah, not all data is cool, but data-centric decision making is a really cool topic, because when you look around, other than places like in the cannabis industry, growing plants is very data-centric, data-driven. I'm not so sure about anything else on the operations side, and certainly not on the diversity side. And that's true really across a lot of industries. There's just not a lot out there. And you can look at professional baseball, that's data driven, but we definitely need more data driven, data centric decisions. We also need more empathy, but not having one doesn't preclude you from pursuing the other.
Sure. So yeah, we recently sat down with the Cannabis Regulation Oversight Officer, Danielle, and one of our follow-up questions, it was meant to actually be, it was like one of the only questions I prepped them on, which was the diversity, equity, and inclusion study. And I just got so excited, I forgot to ask about it. So in my follow-up email, I said, hey, I prepped you on this topic. I forgot to ask you about it. Could you give me the answer, to the question, since you were prepped on it? And they sent me that the state is working with the Illinois Gies business College of Business. Am I saying that right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. I about mixed it up there.
Yeah, we there's no standardized way to say business school in the US for some reason.
Yeah. Well, it was crazy how it worked out, because we'd booked her, and then we had booked you, and I didn't even realize that there was going to be a relation between the conversations,
Cool.
So it's funny how it all worked out. This episode of the Chillinois podcast is possible because of listeners like you. If you're able, please support our podcast by making a one-time, monthly, or yearly contribution of your preferred amount at chillinois.net/support. Your contribution helps us to afford fees that are required to capture, produce, and distribute this podcast. Once again, you can contribute any amount to us at chillinois.net/support. Enjoy the rest of the episode. So yeah, tell us if you could. Actually, before we get to what you're doing for the state and some of the cool things that you found, because I'm sure there's a lot of conversation there. Can you just kind of tell us how you got to where? Give me the highlight reel. How'd you get to where you are today? You mentioned before we got on air, you're from Pennsylvania.
Right. Yeah, I graduated from undergrad a long time ago, 2004. Worked for 3 years after that, but I always wanted to be a professor. Kind of funny, like a really lame dream when it all comes down to it. And some people want to be astronauts or surgeons, and I just want to be a professor. But it was always a target of mine, and really, I think it became a lot more likely when I had a class in spring of 2004 when I was at the University of Pittsburgh, and a professor really was pushing a PhD on me, and she noted that, and to put it bluntly, the trade-offs you make in terms of income to get a PhD are not as big when you get a PhD in a field like accounting or finance, as it would be like in a field like, say, chemistry or English. Or another one. And, I grew up, I was a farm kid. So, economic security was a very important consideration. And that there's like 4 or 5 years, sometimes more, that you have to, get out of the work world in order to get a PhD. We're suddenly not seeming so costly to me. So I'm like forever indebted to that professor for steering me down that path, because I'm not so sure I would have ever really pursued it otherwise. But I actually got my PhD here at Illinois, and then went to the University of Florida for my first faculty job. My research is really the psychological side of accounting and accounting judgment. Like, what really makes accounting professionals tick? What are the biases that influence how they process information? And in particular, my research is about advice. How do you weight the advice from others, and how do you really make recommendations to others, and how does that differ from when you make decisions for yourself? Which that sort of difference between self and other is really fascinating. And during that time, because some of the research also touched on status, I kind of branched a little bit into socioeconomic status, equality, and issues of DEI, which then steered me to here.
Gotcha. If I could, I don't mean to be, well, people are going to hate me, but you know what? I'm that kid too. I also came from a small farm town. How, can I just ask you, how did you become cognizant of the fact that equity is something that we need to address as a society?
It's I don't know.
And you realize why it felt weird to ask the question that way. It's like I was painting with a broad brush, as if everybody from a small town is just not aware of that. But seriously,
but you are. I mean, you're right. I don't
think I had. There was maybe 3 black kids in my school, just to put it that way.
I was gonna say we had, I think, 2 black families, whose kids were around my age. Yeah. We were very white, very overwhelmingly Protestant. Not like evangelical Protestant, mainline Protestant, but overwhelmingly Protestant area. But really, the first part of it that got me was income. So economic inequality was actually sort of my entry into this area. And I continue to think, we can argue about which is more important, and the reality is they're all important. Yeah. But I say that in many ways, income inequality trumps racial inequality in some ways, where, a wealthy person can kind of do what they want no matter how they look. Now, there are certain instances in our society where that doesn't work, but that was the perception that really led me here. And it was not the most, sophisticated perception. Sure. I didn't appreciate all of the nuances. But as time went along, in particular, the racial inequality in drug arrests, drug enforcement, was incredibly hard to ignore. And it was part of an interest I always had in this area. So to me, it was natural that if I'm thinking about, well, what is it that kind of drives a person who may not have grown up with very much to choose a certain course of study in college, or what's driving first generation college students to do that? You can't really, you can think about income in a vacuum without thinking about race, but the two are highly correlated.
Yeah.
So learning about one kind of requires you to learn about another. And one of my colleagues, a guy named Paul Madsen at the University of Florida, has done a little more research than me on racial issues in accounting. And one of the fascinating things that he found is that when you look at historically underrepresented groups, at least in his research and also in the research we've done together, you can look at historically underrepresented groups as, at least in terms of the data, not in terms of understanding the people or understanding why, but just in the what, there are Blacks and everyone else. The findings of, for integration of historically underrepresented groups into the accounting profession, there sort of is an observation for Hispanics, Asians, Native Americans, women, and then there's what happens with Blacks, which is totally different. And it's a good analog for enforcement of drug laws, because that also, in the limited amount that I've seen, because there isn't perfect data on this, is that sometimes, like, for example, sometimes, whites and Hispanics are kind of close in terms of enforcement, arrest numbers. There's an interesting study looking at like 95 million FOIA records of police stops. Mm-hmm. It was published in Nature, and just really looking at, is there bias in police stops? And what they find is that there's sort of, whites are obviously lower than everyone else. That's not surprising. And then Hispanics, depending on the test, were certainly in between whites and Blacks, or close to whites, but it was always worse for Blacks. There's something unique about the institutions of our country that seem particularly focused on targeting and harming, really, Black Americans more so than anyone else. So we look at like the drug war. There have been harms to the drug war. There have been victims of all races, colors, and creeds. But I don't think it's controversial. It shouldn't be controversial at all to say Blacks have had it worse.
Yeah, absolutely. I believe the language in the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act is that maybe it wasn't in the law, but it was oftentimes used when you described, when they would describe the social equity efforts behind the law. They would say that we're doing this to right the wrongs of the war on drugs, which disproportionately affected Black Americans, right? So that's absolutely the case. The other part I think that is used in that point is that to complete the quote, if I'm mistaken, I'm doing it off the top of my head, it's like while whites use at the same rate. Mm-hmm. So it's like it's not like they're getting caught because they smoke more weed, right, or anything else. They are just more likely to be affected by these policies.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, there are probably many reasons for it.
Yeah.
And reasons that I, can only begin to internalize. Like, there's so much of it I don't understand.
Yeah.
But it's, at the same time, I hate to use the word like fascinating or interesting for something that's so pernicious, but it is fascinating. And efforts to undo that, or efforts to at least make it not as bad, to just mitigate this, they're very important, and they deserve attention, and they deserve to be given a chance to succeed. Part of it probably also too is, when I say fascinating or interesting, I'm really talking about it from like an academic point of view, that it is something I want to learn more about, and I'd like to the extent I can, like bring data to bear to build insights into it. And taking it from that sort of academic view implies a bit of neutrality.
Sure.
You can't go into it like wanting an answer.
Yeah.
And so by calling it fascinating or interesting, and I have that academic view, I'm not, I can't say that I'm neutral on it, even though I think that implies neutrality. I'm not, I don't think you can be neutral on it.
Right. But you try to, I think your point is you try to remain, just like we do with anything, we try to study, we try to put in controls and blinding to try to remain neutral,
sure.
So anyways, let's talk about, let's get to the business of the hour. So like I said, we talked to the CROO. They said they're partnering with the Illinois Geese School of Business. And I want to hear about this study that you're working on with them. Like, even like when you were tasked with it, I know I am familiar with kind of how the law reads, but like, what was it like to be tasked with this?
Right. Well, it was something we worked out kind of together, the regulators and me, because I actually had the crew, Danielle Perry, come talk to my class twice actually before we kind of went down this path. And I was really just interested in DEI in general, on just diversity and social equity efforts, particularly those that were focused on a growing industry, something kind of new. I just wanted her to speak about it because I don't think our students get a whole lot of exposure to it. Sure. Certainly not from the perspective of risk, of organizational risk, which is what I teach. So that was just a great opportunity. And then in just learning about and getting to talking, what can I do to help? Like, what can we do? What else can we do together? And what the regulators really had is a requirement in Illinois' Legalization Act, the Cannabis Regulation and Taxation Act. There's a requirement in there that requires the state of Illinois, and I think it requires her office specifically,
correct, to
report annually on diversity, equity, and I think it mentions explicitly barriers to entry.
Yep.
In the industry. And they tried to do this last year, and it didn't work as well. And we just in getting to talking, I did let them know I researched some of these issues, and I put together surveys and collect data from people for a living. That's my job.
Yeah.
So I can help. And we developed 3 surveys, one for licensees in the industry, and completing the survey, love it, is a requirement for licensure in the state of Illinois, which is fantastic. So they don't have a choice. They got to do it. One for employees and then one for vendors, really to get into demographics, sort of financial barriers to entry, cultural barriers to entry, in those 3 groups. And so we wound up getting, I think there are currently 99 licensed companies that have responded. About 4,500 employees have responded, which it's looking based on what companies estimate their number of employees are. And if you sum up all of what the companies estimate their employees are, it looks like it's a little over 50% of the industry in the state that we have responding. And there are about 150 or 200 vendors who responded as well. So all that data is giving us a lot of insight into the diversity of the supply chain, information that's necessary about who's running these companies, who's, not just who owns them, but who's overseeing on behalf of shareholders, who's on the board, who are the executives. Mm-hmm. And then finally, who are the employees, which I think we have talked about in the past too, which is kind of something that for some reason nobody talks about is where there's like an obsession with who owns the companies, but nobody cares who works for them. It's
what their working conditions are.
Even better yet, what the working conditions are.
Yeah.
And that's important too. It's not like the thing that we're focused on is not important, but
sure,
there is more. I think our attention spans are broad enough to focus on more than one thing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We'll have to talk about that later. I don't want to branch off, but
sure.
Yes, we can focus on more than one thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so we using the survey technology that the university has, obviously writing a contract was a little of a bit of a pain, but
sure.
not as badly as it could have been because we're I don't know how much I should say this, but I think this is all public record, so it's not like I'm revealing anything.
Sure.
But because we're both in state agencies, it's much easier for really the state to contract with itself than it would be, say, for like a private entity.
Right.
There's just different rules, so it was a little bit smoother in that regard. And then we collected the data really in December and January. So December of 2021, January of 2022. And we've been, and right as of now, we have a data team as a student-led consulting group that's working on a data management platform for the state.
Cool.
It's been put into research-ready form as far as I can see right now. But the idea is building on some additional authentication and authorization controls around the data and accessing the data, and then layering on some analytics to create an actual dashboard. Which to me is just kind of cool, creating a command and control dashboard to see, we want to know, what is the average perception of inclusion using a validated scale? What's average inclusion at this company? And in theory, not in theory, in reality, I mean, they could do that with this data. And we're going to do some really cool things coming up. I think it's going to be unbelievably cool.
Yeah, well, data's cool, right?
Data is cool. And the more of it, and I think I'm with you on this one. Data is cool, and data is especially cool when you can start linking data sources together.
Yes.
And so we've got something coming down the pipeline with the production data set that every one of these companies has to use, the seed to sale systems, where I am relatively confident that we can get that linked up to the diversity data, where the level of insight and monitoring and measurement of diversity and how the conditions in which it helps companies, the conditions in which it doesn't, and really maybe even the conditions in which companies are really pursuing it and they're not, will be, I think we'll be able to develop insights that no one else can. Like, for example, truly looking at the equity in the supply chain.
Yeah.
And not just who are you contracting with, but what exactly are you selling them? Are you selling them higher quality products or lower quality products? Are you, maybe if you're one of the larger companies, are you maybe carrying additional stock? And this is something that we're gonna have to watch really closely. Are you carrying additional inventory in your locations that are closer to like smaller operators? Because that would be a classic oligopoly, or to use a better term, cartel move in order to knock someone else out of the market. It's sort of the alternative to undercutting them on price.
Yeah.
If you're not competing on price and you're only competing on who has the most stuff, which I think is kind of the way cannabis probably is, people are less price sensitive than in some other areas. You can simply, you can undercut your competitors by just keeping a level of inventory that they could not possibly keep. You can basically serve the entire market without them.
Yeah.
So you want to be careful if companies are doing that in places where they're a little bit closer to smaller operators. And that's going to be very, very concerning upcoming when new licensees are entering the market, the new craft growers, the new infusers, the new and especially the new dispensaries.
Yeah. I mean, I don't, want to go too far down this tangent unless you got something to add, but like, I absolutely agree with you. One of my number one fears that we've shared on the show is like, as soon as a craft operator actually does have some shelves, some products to put on the shelf, you're going to see the price floor drop in Illinois. Because frankly, you look at these operators and the prices they charge in Illinois versus prices they charge. And I've got a buddy that lives in Arizona, and a cartridge that costs $120 in Illinois costs like $40 in Arizona. It's the same company, but what they've realized is like, there in Arizona, there's competition. I got to lower my price if I want to sell these things. Here, they're like, where the fuck are you going to go? By the way, we can curse on this podcast.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah. Fuck
good,
yeah, right?
Good. Fucking A, right.
Yeah. So, but like, where are you going to go? That's their view. Yeah. And a lot of people have started to go to Michigan via reciprocity to take advantage of some, good prices. But not everybody has that option. And that's what we hear all the time is that like, look, there's over 100 dispensaries in the state, and there's going to be more opening potentially. But when we started this, there were 55, and so, yeah, it was kind of there. And I believe they're still operating on their modus operandi is, what are you going to do? Where are you going to go?
Right.
And,
Yeah, I don't doubt that. I know you don't want to go too far down this. I'll just add a note that it's not, you never know this. You have to see what happens. In Illinois, it's not all just profiteering, or, I say rent extraction or whatever you want to call it. Because the regulations here are stricter than just about anywhere else.
Yeah, that's true.
So there is that side of it. There are high compliance costs, but compliance costs aren't going to explain the why, N8 is $65 before you add tax.
Yeah.
Which is just not a competitive price in the long run.
And I mean, the thing is, wholesale prices, I'd love to see this data. I don't think it's included in maybe in your study, maybe it is, but I don't think it is, but wholesale data or wholesale prices are crazy. My co-host Justine used to be an agent in charge. And so she'd check in inventory, and I'm talking over 100% markup. The ounces that they're selling for like $280, they got them for like $50, and it's just kind of, like I say, standard. I really think when we see new operators come on board, you're going to see the floor drop to make it really hard for those new operators to compete.
Right. And that is, I know you don't want to go down this path.
No, we can. We got plenty of time.
Dude, that is, Cole, I'm telling you, that is something that I don't believe regulators, and it's not so much the regulators here. I don't believe regulators and observers have thought enough about that there is overall something of a zero-sum game between promoting access to cannabis, and which is particularly important for medical cannabis patients, and the definitions of success for a diversity, equity, and inclusion program for cannabis. People want this to be and I agree with it, that they'd like it to be an engine for generational wealth creation. But in order for that to happen, the licenses have to be worth something, and there have to be profits to be had. And that is directly in contradiction to a need for, or in conflict with, a desire for lower prices. And I have my own opinion about which one I'd prefer, but I won't go into it as much as to observe that there's a big trade-off there that I don't think enough people have considered.
Yeah. Well, why don't we just go into that real quick, and then I want to talk about the data and maybe some of the takeaways you've had.
Sure.
Let's go into that really quick, because I talked to Danielle, and she mentioned she speaks to the regulator in Washington all the time, and we've seen him on videos. He's a big proponent of the quote unquote free market. And I always have to step that back, because people think when I say free market, they think that like no testing, you just, all that stuff. Like, no.
The Wild West.
Keep regulations, but there shouldn't be license caps. The thing you just pointed out, and it's something else that Danielle described on the show, is that, the intent of this law, and the intent oftentimes of capping licenses, the amount of licenses that can be issued, is to inherently, or sometimes I say artificially, inflate the value of that license. And again, like you said, it's the idea that the value could create intergenerational wealth. Now, I am just trying to learn about this, because we have what happened in Illinois, and people have their complaints about it. And then you see what's going on in Washington and Oklahoma. And back to the regulator from Washington's comments, he's said, like, here's the thing with with our approach, everybody knows what they're getting into, and nobody's getting screened out. With another approach, and I'll loosely quote Toy Hutchinson really quick. She said there was 4,500 applications for, 185 licenses.
Right.
Inherently, that is screening people out. You know what I mean? And whether or not that's right is another question too, because we had the social equity scoring built into it. So maybe that's okay that it screens some people out, right?
Right.
But the fact of the matter of screening people out. It's like, well, is this achieve? And that's I feel like it's a huge debate in cannabis right now. Which way is the way to to achieve the most equity? It seems like you have thoughts on it. What are your thoughts on it?
I don't. I do, but I don't know that I fall on one side or the other on that. I hope that there's a middle ground where to use a cliche, the truth is somewhere in between, that you can have license caps that do allow for some artificial scarcity, for the right to legally grow and sell cannabis. We'll come back to the grow issue in a second. But the right to legally sell cannabis, to make that activity valuable, to allow for some level of wealth creation, but also to keep it reasonable. At this point, there have been enough states that have legalized, and I think we should have a decent idea of what the implications are of having so many dispensaries, or so many people per dispensary, or so many dispensaries per square mile, like what the actual implications of that are. I mean, we know that in Oklahoma, there are dispensaries everywhere. And,
you can't throw a rock without hitting one.
In Oklahoma, of all places. Yeah. And same in Oregon, and probably same in a couple other states. And then a place like here, it's a little more restricted. But that makes sense in light of the fact that this was the first state to include social equity as the centerpiece of legalization. And it's good that the state recognized that if we want to do this, we've got to make this valuable. But there's an element of this where I probably start to get way too irritated that politicians far too much are treating consumers of cannabis like money pumps. And if you know anything about economics, money pumps don't exist. There's nothing that's just an infinite supply of cash. And in this case, it seems as though people just are working under the assumption that we can abuse consumers as much as we want, tax them as much as we want, make it as hard as possible for them to just access the products that they would like to purchase in a legal fashion. That there's too much of that philosophy that we can just do that and do that forever without any repercussions. And the primary repercussion is people won't enter the legal market. They'll use the illegal market, and accept the risk of whatever that is. And we know, as we started this podcast, we know that the illegal market works better for some people than it does for others. Mm-hmm. And that's a shame. We might have gone a little bit too far, and may be continuing to go a little bit too far in the high price, high tax. The consumers will just bear the cost no matter what. They're treating it far too much like alcohol and tobacco in that, especially like tobacco, which it's not tobacco, so it's not going to work forever.
Yeah. It's one of the things I do think is important. There do have to be some caps. I want to paraphrase from actually, I think she is a University of Illinois alumni, Shalene Tidal.
Yeah, she's an accountancy alum of Illinois as well. So.
Yeah, I hope to sit down and speak with her one of these days, because she is just brilliant. And she published a paper called "How to Avoid a Nationwide Monopoly in Cannabis" or something. We'll throw the link in the show notes, folks. One of the things she does say is that certain caps are good, ownership caps. And it's actually something that we have in Illinois, where it's like you can only have 10 dispensaries per entity, 3 cultivation licenses per entity. And what's nice is like Cresco, one of the biggest operators in the nation, arguably, just acquired Columbia Care, which owned a few dispensary locations here in the state of Illinois, owned a few a cultivation center, maybe. I don't know if they owned a few, but the point is that put them over their limits. We asked Danielle Perry about that. There's a whole process where they have to divest and give up those licenses. The point is, I think those are good, because you don't want, like you said, and Shalene ends up using this word. I think she used the word monopoly in the title just because I need to ask her why, because I've spoke to economists and they've all used the word you used, which is oligopoly and cartel. Which
That's
there's
the
a
nasty version.
Yeah, it is nasty, but it's important to note, like from what I understand, like an oligopoly is required for a cartel to operate.
Yeah.
So that's why those two relate to each other. I point that out because there's a lawsuit right now that says monopoly and cartel, and it's like, I don't mean to get caught up in the details because I don't know what I'm talking about. I want to be clear. Right. I'm not an economist, but when you talk to people and it's like, well, this is what's actually going on.
It is. I'd love to do a study because I want to go a little bit deeper into the nerdy, wonky economist speak. I personally believe it's probably a Cornell oligopoly where they're competing on quantity, not on price. I personally don't believe you're getting an advantage here by undercutting your competitors on price for a product like cannabis, for which consumers are fairly inelastic in their demand. Their demand doesn't go down all that much when price goes up. You can just compete on quantity. Whoever's the biggest gets to win. And if you read, like for example, people who write about like the more financial side, the stocks, weed stocks and things like that, some of the more thoughtful people writing about that stuff are acknowledging that like size is everything.
Right.
And until, if there's like proposals to put caps on the number of cultivation centers, the number of dispensaries, until that comes through, that'll be the case probably.
Mm-hmm. Justin, let's talk about the study you're doing, and let's really quick remind folks, because we kind of went off on a tangent, and I think some of the things, it's funny, some of the things we talked about may even be things you've identified as barriers to entry, but what is the study, like the parameters of the study? You mentioned inclusion, diversity, barriers to entry.
It's very broad.
Okay.
The parameters are broad. And that's by the way, this is not me just aggrandizing them. That is a testament to like a compliment to the regulators in Illinois.
Good.
They appreciate research. They recognize its value. And they also are of that we can focus on more than one thing view. And so they, when I told them, for example, barriers to entry aren't just financial. They can also be like embedded within the kind of culture of an organization. Mm-hmm. Lack of inclusion, not feeling as though you belong or valued, workloads that are excessively high, unfairness in performance evaluation, job assignment, things like that. Those are all relevant too. And there's a lot out there in the academic literature and the scholarly literature about this. And so when I proposed we should measure this, they said, okay, let's do it. So we have perceptions of inclusion at every single company. Maybe not every single establishment. We did ask for employees to self-report both their company and their establishment. Not everybody did, so you can't map it perfectly one-to-one. But in theory, at least for every establishment and company out there, we can identify, what on average was the inclusion, the level of inclusion, or the degree to which, say, company leaders cultivate a culture where diversity is valued. These are the types of things you can only get if you're asking employees about it. You're not going to get an honest answer if you ask Cresco, not picking on Cresco, but
sure. just
the
any
first
company.
one that came to mind. It's actually a testament to them that they're the first one that came to mind. But you can't just ask Cresco, okay, self-report to us. How inclusive are you? I mean, they would say, we're really inclusive, super duper inclusive. And it's because it's not because they're lying. It's because they would probably like to believe that. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say they probably desire that. Mm-hmm. And we can't, obviously you can't audit your own work, so you're not going to necessarily get the most accurate answer. So you've got to ask people. Yep. So the barriers to entry are on the company side. We ask about financial barriers. We ask about management agreements, which is data that I haven't even had a chance to go through yet. And a management agreement you might ask, what's a management agreement? Yeah. Or for me to explain what a management agreement is. A management agreement is when, really in any industry, when say a smaller company, I'll just say smaller, may not have expertise in a given industry, or they may just simply not have employees to enough employees, technology, capital, whatever, to really manage the scope of operations that they need to manage. So instead, they'll hire another company to essentially manage the company on their behalf. And in return, that other company who's doing the management will get a percentage of the profits of the company.
Sure.
And so this is a big concern, because obviously you can see it doesn't take too much insight to see where that could go and how that could go wrong. You have smaller operators who aren't as sophisticated, aren't as well connected, don't have the same resources, who would get into the industry and then would essentially be sort of ripped off by larger companies who will come in and say, yeah, for 90% of what you earn, we'll do everything for you. And that 10% may still be really, really good for the owner of the smaller company, but it's probably a lot less than what they'd be earning if they were just operating in the market freely.
Sure. I'm gonna move this just a little bit closer to you, since we got groundskeepers keeping this place beautiful. It's just picking up a little bit, but it's all good. Yeah, man. That's sorry. Were you about to? I felt like I may have cut you off by. Okay.
No. So, but I think it's just in conclusion. So there are management agreements. There are. We ask about. What else? There's a lot. We even ask about some sustainable business practice questions. So like just energy usage, consumption. There's a lot of questions about community engagement, and
like what they do. Wait, like you ask the community about?
No, asking the companies what
they do,
what they've done for their communities beyond just creating jobs.
Cool.
In fact, I think the question explicitly says, "What have you describe what you've done
for the community
other than job creation?" It was asked in a nicer way than that, but it's. In some ways, cannabis, it's not that cannabis is so unique in this regard and that it has to be an industry in which diverse, equitable, sustainable business practices are so important. It's no reason it should be cannabis and not, defense contracting or energy or anything else. But the reality is it's a hot topic in cannabis. The microscope is on cannabis. So why not cannabis? It's a laboratory at this point for us to test cool things.
I was about to say it's a laboratory. I think we've got our own little experiments going on in each state. And like you said, what Illinois did, to their credit, is they started involving social equity in part of the conversation. Like you say, it should be part of it's a problem society wide. I mean, in the interview that you were featured in, it wasn't, you were just a segment in it, but one of the people asked an applicant, do you think we're going to achieve equity, and she said, in the United States of America, so it's like, so it's interesting because we're able to have it under our purview and our control rather than it be. And that's actually, it's funny. Some people argue that at a federal level, they should simply decriminalize it, not legalize it and set up a regulatory structure so that, at a bare minimum across the United States, it not be a criminal act anymore. And then these types of experiments could continue so that they're closed. And it's, I kind of like it because it gives you the opportunity to work with your representative, and your representative works with the other representatives, and hopefully everybody in the community has shared values.
Yeah. This is a tangent. I don't know how far we want to go down this line. I agree with that perspective. Yeah. You've almost perfectly captured my view, other than I don't like using the word decriminalized, because for whatever reason, I don't understand what it is that decriminalization in the United States, as it relates to this topic, always means just that, literally decriminalize. It's still illegal. Right. Like that's where that's where I balk at it. It's like, it's got to be the
correct term. We talked to Justin Streckle, who used to be the head of Normal. He now started his own thing. He said depenalize.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah. That's okay. Perfect. That is perfect. I would trust him before I'd, trust myself on terminology or anything like that. He knows more about it than I do. That's perfect. I would say there's one thing that I would love to see them do, and I don't think it's even possible, would be if they legalize federally, or depenalize federally, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
If there could be a nationwide database, I'll call it the hands-off list, recording whose records have been expunged. Because expungement, Danielle has explained this to me.
Yes.
And it's a, I'm sure she might have talked about it on your podcast.
Absolutely.
I did not listen to her talk, her interview with you, before I did this. So I should have done that.
It's all good.
Is that, that you don't know, once it's been expunged, it's supposed to be gone.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can't verify what's not there. And there's a legitimate concern that it's not that everything that's being expunged, that everything that should be expunged has not been expunged.
Absolutely.
And it would be nice at the federal level, like a do not call list, but a do not call list that actually is effective. Like one that, these folks, were penalized under an unjust law. It's done. It's over. And maybe, does there have to be tax? I don't think that'd be that expensive. I'm personally opposed to a federal regulatory infrastructure. I am opposed to federal level taxes, let alone a 25% insane tax that is in the CAOA.
Yeah.
And frankly, I'm vehemently opposed to involving the FDA in this in any way, shape, or form. To me,
but they want to so bad.
They do. I don't know what it is. It's the idea that the federal government, the most dishonest, vindictive entity there is about cannabis, is somehow going to be our savior.
Right.
And then I see lots of people do this. There's lots of scare tactics about big tobacco. And I'll say, for the record, big tobacco has no market share whatsoever in this industry in the United States. But I would personally trust Altria on this issue before I'd trust the federal government. I mean, Altria is not imprisoning people.
Yeah.
Altria is not arresting people. Altria is not actively attempting to ruin people's lives because they have a past arrest or conviction for marijuana. And the federal government might be one of the few entities that's killed as many people as Altria has. So they're all in the big leagues in this regard. It's not that Altria is good, but on this one, I don't think it's as bad as the feds are. And plus, big tobacco's been defanged for the past couple decades anyway.
Look, at a bare minimum, police shouldn't be involved in this at all, and it's like a testament to, I know that this is a very nuanced topic, but when you see a firefighter, you usually are not worried at all. And in fact, if you need them, you're pretty happy to see them.
Right.
Even if you need a cop, kind of a little hesitant to call them.
Oh yeah. No one says fuck the fire department.
No one says that.
No, not in the history of music have I ever, or anything else, have I heard that expression. Quite the opposite, but you're right.
Yeah. And a final thought, then we can try to, unless, feel free to tag on to this, but before we get back to the study, is I hear all the time, we're talking about expungements. I totally agree. One of the points she made on the show was how hard it is to ensure that happens, because some departments have electronic file keeping, but other departments have paper.
Yes.
So it's it's a big deal to do that, which is crazy, because it's it was easy enough for you to slap me with that charge. It should be easy enough for you to erase that charge, in my opinion. But I know that it's different.
Right.
There's a lot of people on, I would say, my side of the fence that say we need to continue expungements. I'd agree with that. We need to grant clemency to all nonviolent cannabis offenders. I agree with that, but why do we need to add the phrase nonviolent? Here's my thing. If you hit somebody while you're high, we should still take the weed thing off of your charge.
I agree.
The crime was that you hit somebody.
Right.
It's really weird that even people on our, and maybe they're, well-intentioned, or that phrase sells better. But to me, it's we don't even need to clarify nonviolent. It's just that whatever anybody did. Right. Take the cannabis out of the equation. That should not have been a crime. Yeah. So anyways,
our representative, the representative for, I won't just say mine, but for where we sit right now, Carol Amons, she filed a legalization bill before the CRTA. It didn't even get a vote, as far as I recall. And the CRTA eventually was the one that everybody went with. But in her original bill, which was way better, in my opinion, she wanted to include things like charge ups, or what's the phrase? Essentially where you use the drug charge as an excuse to
get more,
increase other charges.
It was a drug induced crime.
Yes. Well, if you have like it's sort of like if you have if you're caught with weed and a gun and you're in your car, you got a vehicle offense, you've got a gun offense, and you've got a drug offense, and the three together are way worse than if you just have one. So why shouldn't we be focusing on those cases too, and not just the ones where it's just weed? And I'll go one step further. Sorry, we're down this
No,
tangent.
it's okay, dude. This is what
I
this
don't
is
know
for.
why the hell we are in, and this is we people on our side, we feed this where it's let's expunge. Every time we're talking about expungements, it's always possession.
Yep.
Let's talk about expunging offenses, penalties, ending penalties, and then expunging, granting clemency for people who are serving time for growing.
Yeah.
Those are the really outlandish penalties. And then for sales. And if we're talking about equity, arrests, you can look at the data yourself. Arrests for cannabis sales are even more racially disproportionate than arrests for possession. Wow. So let's go to the source. It's a lot thornier. Mm-hmm. It's tougher politically. And frankly, from a government perspective, it's also harder because if you're selling illegally, you're also interfering with the generation of tax revenue and all the other objectives that legal markets have. But it's a conversation that should be had.
Yeah, and an attorney we spoke to here in town, Evan Bruno, he said that because he wrote this article for the Illinois State Bar. If people want to check it out, I believe it's called "How We Can Achieve Substantial Reform in Cannabis." It's actually includes one of the topics I wanted to speak with you about today, which is the fact that we'll talk about this later after we wrap up the study. But the fact that cannabis possession arrests continue. You posted a great great infographic showing that cannabis possession arrests continue. And he describes Illinois cannabis law as a tightrope. You slip off of it, and all the old penalties apply in full force. And so, where was I? You're talking about selling, and we only ever talk about possession. He made a really interesting point that, selling, it's funny, it continues to be a crime, like a felony. Right. And it's like, it should really be a business offense because you're operating without a license.
Yeah, exactly. That
instead
is
of a criminal offense.
Yes, that is. Yeah, I will accept and assimilate his view 100. If it's a he, 100%, because that's perfect. That is what you're doing. Yeah. You should be slapped with a fine the same as you would, say, for
if you're operating in a farmer's market without a permit.
There you go. Exactly. An unlicensed barber shop.
There you go.
Or something, or an unlicensed cab.
Yeah.
Nothing worse than that.
Yeah. Speaking of which, this might get us back on track with the study here. The way that licensing works for employees. It's interesting. You get licensed as a hairdresser. You can go anywhere. You can cut hair yourself. Come over. You want to come over to my house later? I'll cut your hair. I got the license.
Right.
If you get licensed to work in the state of Illinois, you can only work at that one dispensary.
Yeah.
And then if you want to, it's not like you can be like, oh, fuck this place, I'm going to the dispensary across town. There's a whole paperwork process in which you got to switch that over, recertify. Anyways, I wanted to, this was just crazy. I wanted to illustrate that for the folks, but back to, the study. So we talked about some barriers to entry. Were there any other thoughts on that topic?
There was one thing that struck me. And I will note, because I'm an academic and I also do this for the state's purposes, that the data is these are preliminary. We haven't done, this isn't something that I would just throw out there and put my name to it tomorrow. But I believe the general, certainly not a level like it was 46% or anything like that. But I think the general trend is something that'll stay up in the data. When we ask people about people within companies, so we're asking companies, what are the biggest obstacles to opening a cannabis business in Illinois, and what are the biggest obstacles to operating a cannabis business in Illinois? Now, to some extent, you got to take the smaller companies who responded to this and responded to operating a cannabis business with a grain of salt, because nearly none of them have been operating yet. So, but they've certainly, a lot of them have people who've done this in other states.
Sure.
So it's not like it's just completely out there. What was interesting to me is when we asked about obstacles, like top of the list is access to capital, regulatory burden. Those are the top two. And there was a list of like 12 that we provided to them. And one of them was the lack of competition. That didn't register at all. And maybe it's the case that, 10 years down the road, that'll be a big concern, or maybe even 6 months down the road when everything starts going, people say, oh yeah, there's unfair competitive practices, or anti-competitive practices rather, that are going on. But for right now, there's not a perception that lack of competition is the problem. There's a concern that regulators, regulations, I shouldn't say regulators, regulations, because a lot of them are imposed by politicians, are making it very difficult to enter this business and to succeed in this business. And there's limited sources of capital for this. And so we got to get really creative to get money into the hands of the smaller businesses in the space.
Yeah, that's one thing Danielle Perry talked about. It's like we focus a lot on getting people a license, but how can they get it off the ground? They need to be capitalized. Another thing you talked about is, let me guess what one of the answers was, maybe on craft cultivation side. I know I hear from a lot of craft cultivators that a regulatory burden they have is that the way the law is written is off the bat, they can do 3,000 square feet of canopy. Yep. And so that's why we saw a big push by Representative LaShawn Ford to immediately increase it for everybody to 14,000 square feet. I don't believe that ultimately passed. So I imagine that's one of the regulatory burdens. If I were to guess another one, like you said, our testing is some of the strictest in the nation. We partnered with Sun Times, and they described that a lot of the times the products you find on the shelves, maybe in Michigan, would not be on the shelves in Illinois, which is interesting to learn about.
I didn't actually see that story. I gotta
check it out. I mentioned it. It's crazy. I was like, look, Ma, I'm on the front page. Seriously, that was crazy.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I've never been on this.
Luckily, it wasn't a picture of me. That would have been embarrassing. It was just my name. So, but yeah, I'll if people want to look in, we'll have the link in the show notes, but it's, the headline is "What's in Illinois Weed? Sometimes Contaminants, Chicago Sun-Times Testing Finds." So that's the headline if you want to Google it right now. But yeah, they talked about the different thresholds, that are allowed in Illinois. Yeah. And they basically did an audit. They purchased products from dispensaries and tested it. And some of them did go past the threshold. They shouldn't technically maybe not have been on the shelves, according to their findings. So it was just an interesting thing. But I would have to imagine that is a regulatory burden. In that article, they described a cultivator has built in a lab to their facility to make sure that they test before they send it to testers. Because I ain't taking a chance of failing that fucking test.
Yeah,
right?
No, that's good.
Yeah.
It's actually a positive thing.
Yeah. Anything else? Like, am I hitting on the target?
Yeah, I think you're hitting it. Yeah. You're right on the nose for the canopy space restrictions. We're actually going to be working with the state over the summer on that particular issue. And like, again, credit to the regulators that they are actually listening and are actually trying to go through. I mean, they have to go through the regular process, however flawed it might be, but they're trying to undertake the steps to fix that.
Yeah. Yeah. So we've talked about barriers to entry, regulatory burdens. I don't want to segue too hard to this topic, but I did, unless you had other thoughts, but I liked the topic that we discussed while we were off air, which was the rates of employees and like their pay rates, sexual orientation, which was an interesting one. Like, you get very interesting numbers there. But before we segue to that, was there any other thoughts?
Let's segue. I can actually give you a bit of a stat that might be a good segue.
Sure.
Just operationally. So we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the industry. I personally believe that in order to advocate for diversity, for example, we should have a good idea of where we are. Yeah. If you're rebuilding a baseball team, You want to know the quality of your current players before you start, trading them away or trying to find improvements. And one thing that was interesting to me is that it seems in the data, it's not a monolithic. The industry is not monolithic with respect to, not uniform with respect to diversity, even within the same company. And the example I'll give you as a segue is looking at corporate headquarters, dispensaries, and cultivation centers. Now, of the three of those, the corporate headquarters and dispensaries, while they're maybe not as diverse as we would like, and maybe they're not quite as diverse as the state of Illinois, they're getting close. They're about 65 to 70% white. I think Illinois is low 60s. The cultivation centers are about 85 or 90% white. And that's, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm not saying that the cultivation centers are like purposefully excluding, because there could be self-selection issues.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But this is not just a single, I guess maybe to put it this way, it's not a single target. It's not like, oh, there's the industry and this, and we just have to hit the bullseye and then suddenly we'll achieve what we want to achieve. Because if you want everything to, and maybe we don't want every one of those types of businesses to look the same. Maybe it's okay for cultivation centers to be more white. Maybe we want dispensaries and corporate headquarters to be less white. I don't know. That's not really for me to decide.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important for us to know the data and know what that is.
Yeah.
And that was a huge, like a glaring fact that came through in the data, that you are really, really not looking at, just one thing. It's, if you want to think about diversity in the industry, breaking apart the different types of businesses is probably a good idea, because nothing has been done in Illinois to really influence this. Like, nothing outside has acted upon the industry to kind of force it to be one thing or the other, and just kind of happening as it is. This is the way things have worked out, that 20 percentage points higher in terms of its white representation would be the cultivation centers versus other things.
Yeah.
Why that is, maybe we can look into that more deeply, right? You got to start the what before you get to the why.
Sure. Yeah. And like you say, it's just the data. So that's interesting. So you're saying that like corporate and dispensaries typically are looking almost representative of what you would expect in Illinois, 60, 65.
Yeah, I might be getting the percentage white off, but I think in Illinois it's in the low 60s, and in the data it's looking like it's going to be about 70%. So it's getting there.
Right. But that cultivation number stood out.
Yes, that is much higher. I suspected it would, but I don't know why.
Yeah.
I don't know why. And it's not as though, from what I've been able to tell, we ask job satisfaction, for example, of these 4,500 employees, and not all of them filled out the job satisfaction stuff because we didn't force them to do anything. But there are 16 dimensions of job satisfaction, and then just like an aggregate that you can create just by averaging them together. And I don't recall anything being particularly different across those types of businesses. So it's not like people in one business type, people in cultivation centers are like enjoying their job more than dispensary employees, or not, or enjoying their job less than these employees, or perceiving that their jobs are any harder. And I don't recall anything about like education levels being that different. It's just sort of like through some selection or sorting mechanism or some combination of those, we've had one is a lot whiter than the other.
Yeah. Can I ask you, on those voluntary surveys, did you get more data than you didn't get? Do you get my question? Like, did your response? Yeah, your response rate. Like, I don't know. I'm just trying to think about it in different ways. Like, you mentioned that you didn't force some of these people to respond, so I didn't know like what the return was.
The response rate.
Yeah, that was what I'm looking for.
Yeah, the only way you can get the response rate is it's impossible to know how many people could have taken it, because the closest we could get is in the survey we asked each company to just provide an estimate, presumably this would be a good faith estimate, an estimate of the number of employees they have in the state of Illinois. And if you sum all of those together, you're getting a pretty good sense of how many employees there are in the Illinois cannabis industry.
Yeah.
Not including the ancillary services. So we could divide 4,500 by that total number, the sum of all the employee estimates, to get a response rate, or at least how representative the sample is. And we would probably, if I recall, when I looked at the data, and I don't think all the responses were in, there were about 7,800 employees total across all the companies. It probably went up a little bit, but that would have us, if it went up a little bit, it would have us about 60% of the industry, which is pretty darn good. You have surveys, generally speaking, if you're in even in like a company, you're lucky to get 40%.
Yeah.
And that's if you have,
unless it's about something very controversial. Then I'm not speaking from experience.
I think that's right. Yeah. If people are like trying to get something off their chest, then yeah, you'll immediately get that. But the good news about the survey is not just that, because we got the large number, you can kind of say it's not just the disgruntled people who are answering, because I'd say the average job satisfaction numbers are way too high for it to be for it to be disgruntled people. And unless 60% of the employees of the industry are disgruntled, which I don't, when you go to dispensaries, I don't think that's the case, at least not where I go. It's hopefully a pretty representative picture of the industry. Obviously there are possible exceptions.
Yeah. Yeah. That's very interesting to hear, because you see a push to unionize
right.
from these different locations, and some have successfully done it, and so a lot of that comes from frustration and
Sure.
everything else. So I wonder if, since you said it was 2021 2022 you did this, at that point people had started to unionize. I just didn't know if there's any way to factor that into satisfaction, it kind of starts to get a little muddy,
It does get a little muddy. I can tell you with the proviso, this is preliminary and blah, blah, blah. Nothing that I do with the data, I think, will ever undo this effect.
Sure.
That generally speaking, if you look at job satisfaction, it's 16 dimensions. It was the amount of everything from the amount of autonomy you have to liking, to how satisfied you are with your opportunities to work with customers, to help people, to retirement benefits, health benefits.
Okay.
By far the lowest ratings, noteworthy, and then the lowest ratings were satisfaction with retirement benefits.
Okay.
And then I think there was satisfaction with wages was lower than the other points of satisfaction. Now it was still above the scale midpoint, so people were still on average satisfied. But then you look at other things where people are really satisfied. It's opportunities to help people, opportunities to work with customers, working with your peers.
Yeah,
those all get very high marks. Unionization. I'm aware that unionization efforts were underway at one of the large MSOs. I won't mention which one, because I don't know how public it is. But probably wouldn't change anything if we took that company out and just looked at everybody else.
I was going to say, it's not like this is kind of something that's happening everywhere. Starbucks, Amazon. So, I mean, it was just an interesting question. I didn't imagine that it would have any, bearing on it, but so.
Now I will say, for anyone who may listen, who is like pro union, I'll say that doesn't mean that the numbers wouldn't go up if people were unionized. They very well might. But I don't know if that was feeding any of the ratings.
Yeah. And from what I've heard, I mean, that could be considered anecdotally, it could be considered anecdotal, but it's not like unionization has fixed everything for people, and not that it always does, but the point I'm trying to make is for example, I guess the comment that I've heard is that it's not unionization that's the problem. It might be the union that people have chosen to go with. So some people are going with, and I'm not making a statement on either way, but UFCW is a popular one right now. Teamsters is another one right now. Some people have started to make the argument that instead of maybe having like a food union adopting cannabis workers, that maybe there should be a cannabis workers union, because it's kind of different. You know? So yeah, I don't really stand. I would say that I'm pro union. I've had very good experiences with a union, and I can see how, contractually negotiated benefits are a good thing. I mean, one of the things that was, I think, hitting a lot of people were scheduling. Like I know plenty of people that work in the industry, and some of them now that work in a union, scheduling is so much more clear than what it was before, because they've, contractually negotiated that, hey, we need a heads up. We can't just be notified on Sunday or whatever.
Right. So, could I ask a question of you?
Sure.
Were these dispensary employees?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's like back to that point about maybe this desire, maybe the either what you could call it, the pressure to unionize, the need to unionize, the whatever it might be, that may differ across business establishment types too, where a company in Illinois that might be more on the cultivator side, like a Revolution, might not have that pressure that another company like a Cresco would have. And I'm not, again, just picking companies, just using examples, not revealing anything about those companies.
Yeah. Might even be your favorite brands. Who knows?
Cresco actually does. Actually, they both, Revolution and Cresco, both do a good job, especially Revolution.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had good products from both companies. So, speaking of good products, we got some Chillinois rolling papers for you, Chillinois lighter, some Chillinois stickers, So there you go. And folks, if you want some of your own rolling papers or lighters or stickers, just go to chillinois.net/spark. We're giving them out for free. So
I think this is going to go right up there.
Hey,
in the office.
That'll be an honor, truly. So yeah, back to the study. That's really good to hear, I would say. I don't even mean to say surprising. That's good to hear that overall, from what you've received, people seem to be satisfied.
Yeah, it does. I didn't have any prior beliefs about or expectations about which way it would go. Yeah. But just looking at the data, it's it is kind of like a good thing.
Yeah. I guess I should say that it is. Maybe I want to say again, this could be considered anecdotal, because we look through life at our two eyes, and that's not always the truth, right? But or the complete truth, maybe. There's a general negative sentiment, I feel, amongst some industry workers where they do feel like they're just a cashier. You know what I mean? And,
right.
So I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't voice that, but that's why I find that data surprising. What you received, people seem to be satisfied. And I wouldn't have thought about the different elements, like helping people, the ability to collaborate, those different things.
Right. Well, that's what, honestly,
that's what my coworker said she enjoyed about it, was really helping people.
Yeah. Yeah. It's true. And you absolutely are. There are a lot of, the lack of better term, newbies who just want a little bit of input, a little bit of guidance. And in my experience, which is really limited to in Illinois, it's been limited to downstate Illinois. The dispensary employees are fantastic.
Yeah.
They're fantastic.
Yeah. Same here. Some of them recognize me, which is the weirdest thing. It's like, you Cole? It's like, yeah, it's kind of weird.
Yeah, so you don't want to, it's just sort of same thing. You don't want to necessarily be like a VIP customer. Obviously not made of a VIP, but like a, frequent flyer at like the liquor store.
Exactly. That's exactly how I felt. I was like, oh geez, these people know my name now.
You're here a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, some of the other numbers you got, as far as like, rates of how am I trying to, I found that you mentioned it in the Al Jazeera episode, the rates of LGBT.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I liked it. If you could phrase it for my audience the way you phrased it, on that interview and to me, I thought it was interesting when you first said the rates of LGBTQ plus people in our society, and then you bring in the scope of the rates you got. I thought that was very interesting.
Right. There's a couple ways you can phrase it. I think I phrased it as in our society. But if you just look at, and obviously the data is not perfect on on what percentage of our society is LGBTQ, because a lot of folks have a lot of justifiable reason to not want people to know.
Yeah.
Especially if you live in certain places rather than others where it might not be as accepted. But it's about Human Rights Campaign. So I believe them. Says that the rate in the United States, you can think of it as about 1 in 25. 1 in 25 people are LGBTQ or identify as LGBTQ. A good chunk of that is people who identify as bisexual. But that's not really that relevant because we didn't ask that in the survey. In the Illinois cannabis industry, it's 1 in 6. And you can do the math pretty easily and say that if 1 in 6 people in the Illinois cannabis industry identify as LGBTQ, that's about 4 or 5 times what we see in society at large. And to me, that's significant because what it means is that for some reason, for whatever reason, folks who are, for the most part, marginalized in our society are gravitating toward this industry. And I would like that fact to be I would like to know if that's the same in other states, number one. That'd be a huge thing to know. And I'd also like to know, why? What is it? Is this a sort of a selection mechanism where there's sort of like a free sort of gravitation towards the cannabis industry, or is it more sorting where you can't get a job somewhere else, so you go to the cannabis industry? I don't know which it is. It could be both, kind of a combination, but it tells us something about the industry that a certain group of people who are marginalized will kind of go to a stigmatized industry. But it's a place where maybe it is more, on average, more welcoming, more open, more inclusive than a lot of other industries. I don't know. But if we're going to think about equity, we're going to think about diversity, especially. This isn't so much equity as it's diversity, really. Yeah. We've got to know who is attracted to the industry in the first place. And while you can't get away from this issue and its connection to race. We're back to you can think about more than one thing. Yep. Diversity has many dimensions. This is a very important one. Yeah. And it's not one that gets talked about all that much, right, as far as I've seen. And if it's the case that it's not just Illinois, it's also maybe is it Massachusetts too? Is it Virginia too? Is it California too? If that's the case, then that's something that, for one, the industry, if they were smart, and they seem to be, they would embrace the heck out of that. Yeah. That they're welcoming a population that is not made to feel welcome in a lot of places. Mm-hmm. Now there are a few wrinkles to that. We ask. This data may never see the light of day. And when I say it may not see the light of day, it may not ever come out publicly with the actual numbers attached to it because it would be fairly sensitive. Sure. But we asked about multiple dimensions of discrimination, including have you experienced discrimination yourself? And when I just look at the population, at the sample of data that we have, and you look at the people who identify as LGBTQ and the people who don't, mm-hmm, perceived discrimination is higher among those who identify as LGBTQ. To some degree, it's not surprising, but it's also not good. But I think what it says is that this, while it's a great thing, it presents unique challenges. Yep. And it would be beneficial for us all if we care about diversity in a broad sense, broader than race, and broader than ownership. Maybe we should look a little bit deeper into this. Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting thought. And I've been thinking about that ever since we talked about it, and I don't know what it would be that would gravitate, that would cause us to see these numbers. I know I'm kind of caught up in this thought, but it's it's hard to even begin to guess, but it's interesting numbers. My only guess, and I don't think this is anywhere close to the truth because the truth is I think it's filled with nuance, but I'm just trying to draw a tangent,
sexuality has been criminalized, which is very human, and drug use has been criminalized, and it's very human.
Right.
And I know that it's much more nuanced than that, but
Sure.
you know, I just wonder if there's some sort of like somebody identifies like feeling like they're coming. I mean, I had to come out about my cannabis use, and I still haven't done that totally. It's why I told you like before we started airing that I don't say certain things because I'm not totally out, you know, and
I
don't want to sound insensitive, but
sure.
There are some similarities.
Yeah, you articulated that much more clearly than I could. I've had similar thoughts with the proviso that I don't identify as LGBTQ. So to some extent, I have no idea. But I don't at a high level. I don't know that anybody would like actively think consciously, I'm part of a marginalized group. I should gravitate towards an industry or an activity that is also marginalized. But there are, more institutional pressures that may lead to that effect. And there's probably a lot of other stuff. And now that we're like sitting here, as we're sitting here talking about this, I'm realizing what I need to do is I need to do a research project about this in particular. And it might come down the road sometime.
As long as in the intro you say, I was sitting on the Chillinois podcast when I'll include this amazing high, well, maybe not high, I guess it already is high.
Illinois, the joint rolling Illinois anthropomorphized as a co-author.
There you go. Yeah, his name's Chili, or their name's Chili. I don't know how they identify.
Yeah, it's a relatively, it's kind of three-dimensional, but also kind of like flat. So two-dimensional anthropomorphized states that use cannabis may not be gendered at all. Who knows? Who knows?
Yep. So those are very interesting numbers. Are there anything else that stood out to you with regard to like the breakdown and?
Yeah. Not offhand, the stuff that's coming to mind. There's more subtle things. Like generally speaking, we ask about inclusion. There are validated scales to ask questions where you can get a valid sense of how inclusive a person believes their workplace is. In general, if you look at like Black employees versus other employees, perceptions of discrimination are a little bit higher. Perceptions of inclusion are a little bit lower.
Okay.
That's it speaks to an ongoing problem that I need to keep working on it.
Absolutely.
I'll use the old expression. It's not as 100% surprising, but it doesn't mean we don't have to act on it.
Right.
But it is good to know. The other thing that came out of it is how underrepresented Asians are in this industry. More so than the now really I've really taken a closer look at four racial / ethnic identities. There's, we looked at white, Hispanic, Black, and Asian. And Hispanic, maybe some of the reasons I said this earlier, I should caveat it that some of the inconsistent findings with respect to Hispanics are that the Hispanics are defined inconsistently.
Sure.
To some it's a race, to some it's an ethnicity, to some it's its own thing, to some it's a subset of white. Who knows?
Yeah. So
this is that's its own problem. But if we look at those four groups, whites, I think I said were in the mids to upper 60s. Probably when you average across all three business types, get into the cultivation centers, you're getting into the low 70s. But if you look at Asians, about 6% of the population of the state of Illinois, and about 2% of the employees.
Wow,
which is really underrepresented.
Yeah.
With like Black employees by comparison, I think about 15% of the state population, maybe about 9 or 10% of the industry. So it's underrepresented, but not like by orders of magnitude the way the Asian population is. And I don't know what the cause of that is. I'm not 100% sure what's driving that. And I think if you take laboratory employees out, they become even more underrepresented. It's a very strange, I shouldn't say strange, but a kind of an unexpected thing. I didn't have expectations coming in one way or the other. There'll be a lot of Asians or not many Asians, but
Yeah.
I would have expected that they would be generally represented about the same rate as you would see them in any other company.
Yeah.
But not here.
Is that part of this study? The labs, independent testing labs?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Yes, the independent testing labs were surveyed as part of the vendor survey.
Okay. Gotcha.
The laboratory employees I'm referring to are people who work in labs for one of the companies.
Like concentrate lab or something.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So it's a slightly different, element or unit of the same enterprise.
Gotcha. Very interesting. Very interesting. One of the things I thought you were that we haven't mentioned yet that I thought was a positive for look, we could easily be, we steered into some topics that some people might find negative or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
when it's just a conversation. That I don't mean to sound negative.
Right.
One of the things, if I were to give a positive, was that you said you found a kind of a universal standard $15 an hour wage.
Yeah. We asked people, and they actually did, which was fantastic. We asked them, and it's probably about the 8th or 9th question. So you don't start by asking someone, how much money do you make? Because that's a recipe to have them just exit the survey.
Sure.
A lot of people did exit the survey, but we asked them to self-report whether they are paid hourly or salary or some other format. Pretty much everybody's hourly or salary. And then, just self-report what your wage is. And going through that, I could say, with a few exceptions, which might honestly have been typos, because you can write 14 when you meant 17 because the keys are right next to each other on a keypad, or you could write 14 instead of 15 if you're using the QWERTY 1-2 numeric keys.
Mm-hmm.
I saw there was it was de facto. There was really nobody working for these companies who's earning less than $15 an hour, which, to the point of, are these good jobs? We should care. Maybe, if we don't want to be promoting an industry where we have great diversity and ownership, but everybody's running a freaking sweatshop.
Yeah.
And that does not seem to be the case, where there actually does seem to be, to the extent you consider $15 a living wage, which in Champaign-Urbana it absolutely is. Maybe not in downtown Chicago, but a lot of the state it is.
Mm-hmm.
You're actually seeing these companies are, in my eyes, doing the right thing and taking care of their employees and not, shortchanging them on that dimension, at least.
Yeah.
Which is, and I don't recall, this could be, I'd leave it to someone like you, who I think watches things broadly more closely than me. I don't recall any rule put in place. I don't recall even any public statements that this, by the companies themselves, that this is that as an industry we're going to do this.
Yeah.
I think I recall a couple companies making these comments, but it seems like everyone's kind of, if someone led, the rest of the industry has followed suit. We didn't see any outliers on this one, so there was no Uncle Scrooge's sweatshop.
Yeah, $7 an hour.
Yeah, nobody working. Those kind of what the minimum wage actually is. There's a de facto, the wage floor is a lot higher.
Isn't it $9.25 right now or something?
Yeah, it's increasing.
And it's going to be stepping to 15.
It's supposed to be stepping to 15 way too slowly. But that, in this industry, that's a positive. Now, I did not look up, though I would imagine it could be the case that people are working a lot of hours, kind of as you were alluding to earlier.
Yeah.
I could honestly, after we're done, I could look it up, just to see if that's sort of a standard or not. But it could be the case that people are working a lot, which, if you're paid hourly, at least you're earning a lot of money, but you're going to burn out if you're working 6 or 7 days a week nonstop for an entire year or more.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, any other thoughts, takeaways on the data?
I would say, stay tuned.
Okay.
Because I believe that the state And certainly the College of Business here, seems to be embracing my relationship with the state of Illinois, and particularly the focus on social equity. And the state is going to produce a pretty lengthy report out of this. And I imagine there's going to be a lot of other more like ad hoc disclosures coming out. And then down the road, after we can link this stuff to more like production and efficiency data, there's going to be a lot of cool stuff happening that's both relevant to cannabis and relevant more broadly than cannabis.
Yeah.
Just, for example, under what conditions do more diverse teams operate more effectively? In the scientific literature, we can say, well, oftentimes diversity works when the teams are also inclusive. Mm-hmm. We can see that, but I think we can go further than that and find out, for example, is are more diverse teams and maybe in more inclusive environments, is job satisfaction higher? Is productivity higher? Is the average sale per customer higher? Are people buying more premium products? Which for the companies, that's an important thing. Are you getting people who are maybe going the extra mile to help consumers, satisfying the consumers, and then in turn, consumers will pay you back by, doing more business with you. There's a long-term game here where maybe not everybody wins. Those prohibitionists you talk about, they're losing, and rightfully so, but just about everybody can win in this situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I know that this might be a little bit out of your ballpark, but I believe that the answer that we got from the CROO is that we can expect to see this data released maybe to the General Assembly in June. Is that when do you, I guess I know that it's out of your ballpark maybe because it's like you hand the data over and then it's like the state, but when do you expect to have the data ready to be handed over?
That should be imminent.
Awesome.
Like if it hasn't happened already, there was a meeting on Friday that I wasn't able to go to where I think a lot of stuff might have been discussed. But the data is in a workable, SQL accessible database now. Some of it still needs to be cleaned up a little bit, particularly data on race, just because there are a whole lot of people who made multiple selections, and there are widely accepted conventions for, if someone says they identify as, Black, Hispanic, and Middle Eastern, North African, there are conventions for things you can do to classify them other than just saying all of these are other. So there's still some cleanup that needs to be done, but I think my understanding is that the data is in a workable format. If it's not now, it will be very soon, because I think if it's not, I'll be hearing about it, and not in a nice way.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, cool. And so obviously we don't know what the future holds, but from what you said, the way the law reads, it would be a yearly thing. So you did you did December 2021, January 2022. So I know that it's hard to tell what the future holds, but would you imagine you'd be taking sending out surveys again this December?
I imagine the objective will be to send them out sooner than that. The intention, contractual issues prevented us from getting it done and sending it out in November. But the goal would be to have this survey sent out so people could complete it before the holidays.
When you send out the survey, do you explain I know it's like you got to be careful surveying. You don't want to influence the data, but
right.
How is it presented? Like, does it say this is required by law and you don't have to fill it out, but this is why we're sending it to you? I guess what I'm asking is, do we relay the benefit? Like, do we try to tell people like, please respond to this? There's a benefit.
Absolutely. For the companies, the primary benefit you impress upon them is, if you want to continue to make millions of dollars for a federally illegal activity in the state of Illinois, you damn well better fill this out.
Right. You said it's connected to holding that license.
Yes.
So that's great.
Which is fantastic.
Yeah.
For employees, we did really try to do some messaging around have your voice heard. Lots of people are doing this. You want us to have we want this to be an industry for everyone.
Yeah.
We need everybody's voices to be heard. And then in addition to that, the companies were also asked by the regulators to really encourage your employees to do this. And I could see, and I personally could see the data coming in. I was the only person who had access to see it coming in. And I could definitely tell some companies were really pushing this harder than others. Because you could see some where there's 100 employees on the first day doing it, and then some you're not seeing anybody. And these are some of the larger companies. But in general, there was a multi-point push to really try to get people to do this.
Not asking about timing and stuff, but do you have it broken down by response rate per company? Because it does say a little bit about the values of the company. You get what I'm asking?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I do.
You got it broken down that way?
Yes, we do. And I can, I don't think I won't say the ones that did poorly, but I can say Justice Cannabis Company was fantastic.
Well, that doesn't seem surprising.
No, it doesn't, does it?
Which is a good thing.
They were the ones that were, you send it out, like, can you send this to your employees? And first day you get 100 people doing it, which I can't imagine that I'd have to look up what their number of employees in the state of Illinois is, but that's a big chunk of their employee base right there.
Well, that's good to hear, because I've talked to people that have been listening for a while. We had Cole Eastman from Justice Corona.
Yeah.
Shout out to another Cole. Coles around the world. So he was on, and they talk about their values and stuff, and you start to wonder whether or not that's lip service.
No, it's not for them. I can only say, in so far as this,
sure,
as telling your employees and getting your employees and really communicating that value, the value of data on DEI issues. If that is an indicator of them like walking the walk, they were certainly walking the walk on this one.
Yeah. We'll put it this way. It doesn't say everything, but it says something.
It definitely says something.
Yeah.
And likewise in the other direction.
Yeah.
It also
absolutely.
says something in the other direction. I can say some of the big companies were kind of more, and not you can't overinterpret. That's why I was happy to share the good one. I don't want to share the bad ones or the ones that were lower, because you never know what that actually reflects.
Mm-hmm.
But sense. I think it's a pretty unambiguous signal that if you've got 100 people on the first day from one company, that's a pretty good indication that the company was communicating it, pushing it, and maybe they didn't have to push it because maybe they've been done a great job of communicating.
That's what I was going to say.
It's
like maybe
it's just sort of, here, do this, and it's okay, we'll do it because we buy into the culture the same way that you all do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So, well, cool. That's exciting. We'll have data pretty soon, and there will be more data collected even sooner than that. If there's any way we can help with advocacy or whatever else, I'll be talking to you and the CROO. What I mean by that is like with regard to being like, hey, because a lot of industry workers listen to the show, and so if I can get ahead of it coming out, like, hey, it's just about November, you're going to be getting this survey soon. There's value in it.
That would be amazing, because it's not trivial. The questionnaire it takes 7 to 10 minutes, which is not nothing. It's a lot easier to do something 30 seconds long. So I'll say to anybody who would be listening, who works for the industry, if they completed the survey, thank you, because it's not nothing for you to take that time out and allow science and allow a better understanding of where we are with respect to diversity in this industry. Allowing that to advance is a big deal, and you're all part of it, and I greatly appreciate it. Yeah, I really do.
So based off the data, and then I think we can start to kind of just close out with some go all over the place conversation. Do you have any, I don't know if this is within the scope of what you've been assigned, do you have any recommendations based off of the data that you've seen?
I think right now it's too early to go to any recommendations beyond the broad. Let's take a broad view of equity and take a broad view of diversity. And frankly, let's take a broad view of inclusion too.
Yeah.
The broad view will hurt no one and help us all.
Yeah.
And I think things like Asians are very underrepresented in the Illinois industry. LGBTQ folks identifying as LGBTQ are very heavily represented, and it's worth more inquiry. Those types of things are not going to come through unless we take that broad view and look beyond just what the politicians say our objectives were.
Sure.
Let's take a forward-looking view and look to what they could be.
Right. Yeah, and I didn't imagine that you would have like any. It's like this is how we fix everything off of but because the other thing about data is that you gathered it once, but unfortunately it takes time and collecting more data. And even then, some of the conclusions you draw off of it doesn't necessarily mean they're true, because more time and more data might swing you in the other direction, though. So
right, this will become. You're right. It's all in 3 dimensions right now, but that 4th dimension is time. And when we add time series to this, it'll be very interesting, because then we'll actually be able to know if we're improving or not.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And I thought it was important to explain this for our audience. It's not like, first of all, we've made the point that it's going to be a yearly thing by law. But there's advantages to like collecting data and analyzing it. It's meticulous, and you need to be able to compare and contrast, and you need time, and so yeah. I'm just glad that I live in a state that puts or that seems to value collecting that data, and seems to value the idea of how can we change things.
And hopefully beyond beyond just the future, being able, what would be fantastic would be being able to compare across states, and not just on the LGBTQ representation, but everything.
Right. Yeah. That was actually going to be one of my final questions. I didn't know if you've, since we kind of are pioneering the idea, like Danielle's made the point that other states are now including social equity, and you've not seen a lot of states do it now without it. So we've kind of pioneered that. But have you seen anything like this done in any other state?
I haven't, not yet. I've talked to one other state where there was some interest in at least doing something like this, and really whether or not we are the ones to help them, I don't really care. What I would hope is just that we allow some data sharing, ultimately, so that we can make the comparisons. Whoever's doing it, it doesn't matter. I'm vendor neutral, and that includes, I'm not even a vendor, we're non-for-profit, but I'm like, I don't have to be the one doing it, and probably it's better off if I'm not the one doing everything. But if we could know, how you can start to get if we want to get to a point of standards and targets and defining success, we've got to know more. We have to know, and we have to know more than just one state. We need a more comprehensive view. And to me, I don't think we're going to be able to define success until we get to that point where we are at that point where we can make these types of comparisons. We can start. Data is a tricky thing, and it's not like we're in a data rich environment here. It's tough. It is true. It is tough to even identify who the hell owns these companies. You want to go through, you want to have a fantastic read. And I don't mean that literally, because you'd probably fall asleep. As a project, I just want to start going through annual reports filed with the SEC by Cresco, Curaleaf, all the publicly traded companies, just to identify their ownership changes and organizational form changes over time. Because some of these companies started as mining companies. I'm just fascinated. And that, again, that's not a bad thing. It's not like they're mining companies in like Burkina Faso or anything like that. It's like in Canada. But it's interesting as to how the industry got to the point where it is. And even though if it got to a point where it is, and it currently is, primarily white owned, that I'm not going to say it's all 100%. Like, it's not like the companies all got together and said, let's all be let's only let whites in. This is how the industry is going to be, and we're only going to do it that way. There probably are a number of forces that acted on it.
Yeah.
And I would just be fascinated to know. But we can start with ownership, but don't just limit it to ownership. Really, we need a comprehensive view of what's going on, because until we can define targets, we're not going to be able to define success. And if we're not going to define success, we're leaving ourselves very vulnerable to the opponents, not to like buffoons, like smart approaches to marijuana. They're like the Naked Gun 2.5 version of this. They're just a bunch of buffoons. But like the slicker opponents, you gotta watch, especially politicians. They're finicky and uninformed people, very susceptible to influence. And so you don't want things to go south.
Yeah. Mitch McConnell's a perfect example where he'll be like, my favorite quote from him is, I think he's holding a hemp pen and he says, "I'm fine with hemp." I'm trying to do my Mitch, but I am not okay with its illicit cousin. It's like, Mitch, I know you're not a scientist. You've made that clear. But cannabis and hemp are the same plant.
Yes, they are.
Like,
and the funny thing is, like, no matter how psychotic the guy is on other issues, Rand Paul is generally, at least for a Republican, okay on cannabis issues. He should inform the other senator from Kentucky on this very basic.
It's
fact.
basic. Yeah, it's very basic. And just to go back to an infographic we talked about earlier, I shared your infographic that I don't know if you made it or if you just found it. And if I can find it, I'm sure I can. I'll play it right now.
The Chicago arrest? Yeah, I made that.
Yeah. Oh, you did?
Yeah, we actually did that. I actually had students recreate that in my risk management class.
Why the line? Why is there this line that so you're basically saying that past this line, cops should still be involved.
Right.
And that's what your graph showed, in my opinion, was possession arrests. What that often means is that you've either exceeded your possession limit, or, well, I guess this would be a transport arrest. I was going to say there's the way that the Illinois transport law is written, according to several attorneys that we've spoken to, people continue to get arrested because they don't have their cannabis in a, quote, odor-proof container.
Right.
Which is, I told Danielle, I was like, could you contact the Illinois State Police and like hook me up with this odor-proof container? And just to prove my point, I've made this point on the podcast so many times, but I've talked to police in this area that went to the dispensaries in town here. And I said, it smelled when you went in there, right? And they're like, oh yeah. And I'm like, is that not an indication to you that the moment a consumer walks out of the dispensary and gets in their car, they're immediately out of compliance with the law? If you can smell it, that means they're not sold in odor-proof containers.
That's true. That's prima facie true.
Yeah,
that's
a conundrum, right?
It is. I mean,
you can have it, but if God damn it, if I smell it, you're going to jail.
Right. Yeah. I think a big one. I'd have to look back down you can drill down into the arrests a little bit to get more data on them. I think a lot of them are also like in public places. Okay. Like if you're like outside, like on your front porch is kind of it's probably a gray area, but if you're like in a park or someplace like that, you could, that is not legal.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I was going to say one of the things that the attorney Evan Bruno in his paper pointed out is that, if you possess at schools, and I believe that's universities included, all of the old penalties apply. Possession is still illegal.
That's just,
I believe national parks, like you're saying. It's interesting that I think he described it pretty well as a tightrope. So you're like walking on the tightrope, but if you slip off a little bit, all those old penalties apply in full force.
Yeah. That's unfortunately because of the federal illegality, and because really all of what we're talking about is essentially just banking on, just trusting in the lack of interest by the federal government. That like it's sort of like we just have to believe that the federal government is not going to prioritize this in any way.
And it really is that way right now, because shout out to Coles in the world again.
Yeah, the Cole memo.
Yeah, I wrote it. No, I'm just joking. It was thrown in the trash can by Jeffrey Beauregard Sessions III. I like to name his Confederate name.
Very, very fitting for him too.
Yeah, very. For folks that don't know what I'm talking about, Donald Trump appointed him as Attorney General. He's been quoted many times as saying good people don't smoke marijuana. And one of the first few things he did was erase the Cole memo, which at the time was extremely scary because it's what medical cannabis has been operating on, and now adult use cannabis. It's the guidance that the Obama administration had. It's a policy memo that allowed basically a framework for states to function. And it's basically like, if you don't do these things, you won't have a problem. So interstate commerce, children.
Yeah, don't sell the kids.
Yep.
Don't fund illegal activity.
Yep.
Do not divert to the black market.
Yep.
That's the price you pay to keep the feds away.
Mm-hmm.
Now, unfortunately, a lot of these silly laws, that tightrope situation is just trying to negotiate like that sort of price of admission that, you still have to, there's probably some, like, I'm not a lawyer, but there's probably somewhere some like rationalization that Illinois is still technically enforcing the CSA. We're still enforcing marijuana prohibition. It's just a little bit narrower than it was before. Like, these folks,
it's actually a really way of putting it. Yeah.
But you gotta like that tight. That's why it's a tightrope. Like, you are allowed to walk this line, and that's it. But Illinois has one of the stricter regulatory regimes in place of all the states that legalized.
Yeah.
Which includes, unfortunately, not having home grow, which to me is like a borderline disgraceful.
I will say that the medical cannabis home grow laws are brilliant. I gotta give props to, I think Kelvin McCabe helped with the language. He used to be a member of NORML, for folks that know that name. Illinois NORML, not Chicago NORML. The way that the possession law, the way that the possession section reads, and actually this was in our follow-up with the CROO, it says that all cannabis cultivated at home exceeding 30 grams must be secured. It's a weird way of saying, in my opinion, because it's like lawyer speak. I don't see how you make this jump, but I've asked a few people and they agree that this is the legal interpretation. What that means is that as long as you secure all amounts above 30 grams, you can have as much as you want at home as a medical cannabis patient. Now,
interesting.
From what I've heard, the card, I don't know if you've ever seen the card, it does have an allotment listed on it.
Oh, I have a card.
Nice. There you go. So, the standard allotment is 2.5 ounces. So that refers to what you can carry in public and what you can purchase from a dispensary in a 2-week period. As you may know, you can get that increased as well. Pretty easy to do. But we asked, for clarification from the CROO. They stressed that this isn't legal advice, but they interpreted the law the same way I interpret it, the same way that multiple attorneys have interpreted it. And I have to say that there was, I think actually Carol Ammons co-signed on this. There was a cultivation for all adults bill proposed, and they used that language exactly. And I was like, yes, because that language is perfect. What people call Illinois a keep what you grow state. Right?
I
it's
like
kind
it.
of like, I like that little.
I don't home grow for a couple of reasons, but it's something I strongly support it.
Yeah.
And I'm actually glad of all the things that kind of are too restrictive. At least that is I don't know if it's a loophole or just a slick slick way of writing it.
You could say it's a slick way of writing it. I feel like we would be, and I think you would agree with this, but I feel like we would be foolish if we didn't wrote that in, because that's what everybody's question is. They're like, well, I've got the right to grow now, but it says on my card 2.5 ounces. If I'm growing 5 plants, I'm going to have way more than 2.5 ounces. And so I'm glad that we acknowledged that through the law, this is one of the good things we got going for our cultivation law.
Now, if we could just get home grow for everyone.
It is.
That'd be a good thing.
It doesn't even make sense to me why we couldn't, I would love to hear the arguments against.
I don't know. I don't know what arguments there. I don't think there are any good arguments against
Correct.
it. But
Yeah.
if I recall, that's right. If I recall correctly, and I think this is mostly, from what I read. I have no inside information on this, but reading, for example, reading Rich Miller, the politics guru in Illinois, around the time of the CRTA, it seemed as though it was mostly law enforcement throwing a fit about home grow. And it's sort of like, and that was also an odd situation, because they're going to oppose it no matter what. But it's like, how much are they going, how loudly are they going to gripe about this? And how much are they going to actually lobby against this? And it's sort of like, well, you're going to save the bill, so to speak, or improve the bill's chances tremendously by just losing this one provision. Because he wrote at the time, and he was right. Like, you're not going to pass this without expungement. You're not going to pass this without the social equity provisions, but you can pass it without home grow. And unfortunately, home grow just got kind of kicked to the curb. So then it's us in Washington, right?
Exactly.
We're the only legal states where you can't grow it yourself, which is kind of absurd.
It is not even kind of absurd. It's totally absurd. It doesn't even,
I agree.
It doesn't even make any sense. And when if you ever grow, you start to realize it's like, this isn't inherently dangerous. It's like,
if you're interested in not normalizing the activity, frankly, my biggest objective for cannabis would be normalization above everything else. But if you don't want this to be normalized, if you don't want this to be like funneling to the black market, if you don't want this there's so many things about it. If you don't want these activities going on, that you should love the idea of home grow.
Absolutely.
But
this is speculation, but I believe so first of all, this isn't speculation. The state police and the Cannabis Business Association, which at the time was headed up by Pamela Altoff, I know her name because she made these statements, they opposed home grow for all adults. Interesting to see a Cannabis Business Association lobby alongside police. Not happy about that at all. And in fact, if you look up the New York Medical Cannabis Industry Association, they also produced a whole memorandum called The Fallacy of Home Grow. And basically they just said, you're too stupid to grow at your home. You're going to use the wrong water, or you're going to get moldy product. That's basically what they've said. Yeah. And cultivators have made statements to us too, because we've asked why they oppose home grow. And they say, well, we don't oppose home grow. We support limits on home grow because we believe an unregulated supply chain, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, you know better than anybody else that I can't get my home grow into BioTrack.
That's right.
You know what I mean?
That's
so
right.
It's not like, I'm going to be submitting my product like it. And even if I did, I'd be subject to the same tests you would be. Right. So it's like that. It's a slippery slope argument, but yeah, so they lobbied against home grow. I believe the reason that home grow happened the way that it did, and again, this part is speculation. It's because the Illinois State Police have, I don't want to say unfettered access to the Illinois cannabis patient data, but we learned in our podcast with CROO, Danielle Perry, that they do have access. Now, I asked about firearms originally because some people have reported that because of their medical cannabis status, they weren't able to purchase firearms. And what I've found through investigating is that it's not the federal government that figures it out. It's the Illinois State Police that hands over data that ultimately causes you to fail that background check. And I'm like, well, how do they have access to that data? I decided instead of focusing on firearms, which aren't important to a lot of people, it's important to a small group amount of people, but instead of that, I wanted to step back that question and be like, what access do they have? Yeah, and in what context?
That to me, that's the question,
right? Yeah. And so the answer was, well, first of all, they've had access to the Illinois Medical Cannabis Registry since they passed the compassionate use of medical cannabis. And actually in the past, they could just run your license plate and they could see if you were a card holder. Huh. You know what's funny is it shows up. I've had a police officer run my own plate. I was like, can you run my plate? I want to see if my card holder status. Yeah. They're like, it was weird. They're like, well, we have to prove that you own this vehicle. I was like, well, here's the title. Here's my license. Run my plate. And they ran it and they're scrolling down. They're like, okay, so here's where your license, shows up, your insurance status. Here's, if you were a concealed carry person, this would show up. And under that is where your medical cannabis card, status would show up.
Huh.
It is funny to me that it's next to concealed carry, as if they're like related, like, oh, he's got weed and a gun.
Yeah, as though the risk is even remotely comparable.
Mm-hmm.
Like the notion that cannabis is in any way comparable to a firearm,
Yeah.
like regardless of what you believe about guns or about cannabis, like there's no comparison whatsoever.
Right.
Like what? Oh, what's he gonna do? Light a joint and burn me with it? Like,
And frankly, we posted a picture back in the day. There was this dude. He's got a truck full of beer. He's standing in the middle of a tobacco field with a gun. And I was just thinking, like, what if he was standing in the middle of a marijuana field, cannabis field?
Oh well, he'd be
with a gun.
felon.
He would look like a criminal. It'd be a scary photo
that's
instead
right.
of an American photo. You know what I mean?
Yes, yeah, that's right.
It's scary.
Put him in a cannabis field and with all that other stuff. Like, yeah, one of these things has never killed anybody.
Exactly.
Never killed somebody. Well, I shouldn't say never. It may be.
Well, and yeah,
never through overdose.
We can get to that, but just to wrap up that point, I think the concession was, and this is what we figured out, is that the Illinois State Police, if they pull you over and you have a lot on you and you don't have your card, which folks, you should always have your medical card on you.
Yeah, keep it in your wallet.
Yeah, keep it. It'll keep you out of trouble. I'm telling you. But what they can do, it's like local law enforcement or whatever, if you're insisting, they can look it up and verify your cardholder status so that you don't have to spend a night in prison or whatever the case may be if you're way over your possession limit, but technically you're within your possession limit for medical.
Right.
So keep your card on you. The other thing that apparently they query the database for is if local law enforcement say, hey, we see that Justin's growing. Does he have his card? And they will look into that. So I don't agree with that, but it's the way that the law is written. I don't think they should have access to any of that information, because in what other context do they?
I don't know.
Oh, Justin's growing coca in his apartment. Does he?
I don't
know.
Throw the N word around too often. This is a different N word, so don't.
I was like, oh, where are we going here?
Don't be word. It's a 4-letter word. I don't throw the word Nazi around too often to describe. But our state does have a Nazi-like love of authority and just particularly of police authority. We were, if you may or may not recall, up until like 2013 or 14, it was illegal in the state of Illinois to record a police officer on video, which is so goddamn unconstitutional. Like you tell someone that and it's ridiculous. And John Stossel, bless him, with his mustache, was doing a special about it, and he had it was before the law was thrown out by the courts.
Mm-hmm.
It was a video of a Chicago cop attacking someone on a bike. And he said, you're seeing a crime being committed, but what you don't know is that the crime is not being committed by the police officer. The crime is filming the police officer assaulting a cyclist. Like, really? We just, it's not just, we also had in Illinois, this was, I think, around 2011, 2012 too. I'm probably getting my dates wrong. We were also the only state that had no concealed carry allowed at all. And I loved the fact that the courts like smacked Illinois down and said, yeah, your law is unconstitutional. And oh, by the way, until you write rules around this, everybody, it's anybody who has who had a FOID card
sure.
could in turn carry. I'm like, good.
Yeah.
You know, it's just, there's, for whatever reason, it's a blue state. Maybe it's the old Chicago machine thing or something, but there's a strong authoritarian bent to Illinois state government that is kind of sad.
Yeah, absolutely.
Kind of sad. You're seeing it here. You're seeing it in this context that, yeah, of course we let the cops have access to people's medical cannabis records. It's supposed, like, first of all, motherfuckers, that's supposed to be medical records.
Right.
So can cops like look up who has Viagra prescriptions? Yeah. Can they look up who's on Vicodin?
Yeah, Adderall, oxycodone.
Oh yeah,
whatever.
I mean, find someone who takes Vicodin or oxycodone for pain. Locate all of them. Suddenly, you have a carte blanche to write any number of DUI tickets you want, because if they have a prescription for it, that doesn't mean that you're allowed to drive under the influence of it.
Right.
So come find out. Are you going to be able to look up whether someone just bought Theraflu or Benadryl?
Right.
Because if you take that, you sure as hell are intoxicated. You're not allowed to drive with that stuff in your system. Well, you are in your system, but you just can't be under the influence and driving erratically. It's just that's just crazy. I did not know that they could do that.
Yeah. It's something we just revealed the other day, and I didn't know either. I knew that the thing about the license plate, and by the way, the thing about the license plate, I need to find the law, but I'm quite confident that they can't do that anymore. They can't just run your license plate and see your cardholder status.
Good.
On the other hand, it's like if they're using it the way that they're saying they're using it, maybe, okay, I agree that they shouldn't be able to be behind you and like, where's a card holder? There's a card holder.
Right.
That's a problem. But I guess if I seemed like I hesitated at all, I was like, well, if they're verifying that you should be able to possess that amount, I don't know.
Sure, I got you. I got you.
I think the thing is though, I think the thing is though, they can profile with the license plate thing. And that's the problem. So, I guess to wrap up, earlier I alluded we can walk and we can do two things at once. And I was like, I want to talk to you about something like that. We kind of been talking about it this whole time. Possession limits. Like, I know that it's probably the tightrope we're walking on because of the federal government, but it's like one of those things that has to go, because when I hear limits, I hear the continued criminalization of cannabis.
Amen.
So,
amen.
And we talk all the time about, this is what I meant by walk and chew bubblegum or do two things at once. It seems like cannabis legalization now is very license focused and oriented. And Danielle Perry has made the point that that's not the full picture. And I totally agree with her. Expungements are part of that, getting people, out of jail. But I also think it's like, we're constantly talking about, let's undo the wrongs of the war on drugs. How about we undo all policies that resemble the war on drugs so that we can because if we continue this way, it's like in 15 more years, we're going to be like, so we undid the last war on drugs, but now there's
exactly. You're right. Because what's going on now in Illinois? I mean, possession arrests, and not just Illinois, it's lots of places. Possession arrests are still occurring. Yeah. And maybe there's summonses, mostly for fines rather, as opposed to, you getting arrested and get to spend the night and then go appear in court and then potentially wind up on probation. But still, that's not the point. The point is, this is all still going on. And you're right. We talk about, let's undo the ill effects, the harms of the war on drugs. And it's like, maybe before we start talking about that, let's stop fighting the war on drugs.
Yes.
Maybe that's where we start. Because like the CAOA, which is just a terrible idea, it's a collection of terrible ideas, except for legalizing.
Is the CAOA? You referenced it twice.
Honestly,
is it the federal?
That's the federal. That's Chuck Schumer's proposal.
And it's not the safe banking.
No.
Okay. Is it like the evolution of the MORE Act?
It's basically the MORE Act's companion bill in the Senate, but it's not just they took the Senate, the House bill and are going to refile it. Chuck Schumer has his own, and Cory Booker have their own objectives, and they want to do their own kind of thing. And so and I say this as the CAOA is actually a thing. It's just a proposal. There's not even an actual bill yet, and it remains to be seen whether it actually ever gets filed. But that and the MORE Act both allow marijuana prohibition to continue in states that want to continue it.
Yeah.
So it's somewhat, and it's not any legalization is better than is better than the status quo. Like I'm not rooting against the MORE Act or the CAOA. If that's what we're going to get, then that's what we're going to get. I'm happier with that than the status quo.
Sure.
That said, man, oh man, if there's a hole in that bill, it's that in either of those ideas, it's that we talk about undoing the war on drugs harms, and it's all of the disproportionate evils, but we're allowing it to continue in half the country. And I understand that's a political game, but honest to God, neither of those bills is actually going to become law anyway. And if you're just going to take a stand, why not take a true principled stand and say, no more.
Yeah.
Texas, if you want to ruin people's lives, go after, well, there are many ways to ruin people's lives, but if you're a government, so find some other way to do it. Not this.
Yeah, Texas, the state of the free, except for when it comes to which compounds you'd like to interface with or anything you'd like to do with your body.
Anything you would like to do with your body, literally anything.
Yeah. And, I don't mean to get into Roe versus Wade, but marijuanamoment.net made the comparison that, it's like this idea that this nation wants to control what we do with our bodies. Are we the land of the free?
No, it's your body, my choice. That's the conservative. I shouldn't say it's conservative. That's the oddball right-wing view of some on the American right. I won't like besmirch conservatism by saying, because I probably, if you think about conservatism, they should oppose the government stepping into your business. That's what they say. That's what
Don't
they say.
tread on me.
That's what they say.
They fly
anyway.
those flags.
Yeah, that's right.
They're like, tread on me, daddy. Please keep treading on me.
That's right. Yeah, please, sir. Thank you, sir. May I have another?
Please tread on me. Please restrict what we can read in schools, what we can talk about in schools, what we can do with our own bodies, what compounds we can interface with.
But keep my taxes low.
Yeah.
That's about it.
Man, we really took a turn for the worse in that. Just joking.
Yeah, we really
depressing topics. Well, cool, Justin. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and I'd love to do this again with you in the future. Especially, since you're at my alma mater. No, I'm joking. I'm gonna do it again.
Stolen valor. That's a different thing.
Exactly. I might as well be. But yeah, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. I'm really excited to see what the data that comes out, and more importantly, what we do with that data.
Yeah, that's going to be the cool part. There's going to be some fun stuff.
Yeah. Well, any last words for folks? I mean, hey, let's make a pitch for the University of Illinois. We're all about engagement, enrollment, and retention.
We have been like, look, because it's on topic. I'll rep for Geese in this way, and particularly what we're doing in the online.
Yeah, and we're talking about the Geese School of Business, not the Geese that we, fight with.
No, not Canada Geese. I don't like them very much. No, this is Larry and Beth Geese, who are wonderful, and the college is named after them. But yeah, what we're doing in the online space, these are IMBA. They all have little I prefix. This is we were one of the first large universities, non-for-profits, to jump into this space. And even to this day, we are still offering an MBA for less than half of what just about anywhere else is offering it for. The college is walking the walk when it comes to democratizing education and improving access. We had a $150 million gift from Larry and Beth Geese. A big chunk of that is going to improve equity and increase the diversity of our school. So, at the very least, this is a college where some fun stuff is happening. And I think I told you in a press release announcing the state and the college partnering on the data platform. There's the press release included a picture of a weed leaf. How many top colleges of business are going to do that? Yeah. This is a special place, and I'm happy to be here. Yeah. And great talking to you too, man.
Yeah, man. Thank you. I was excited that you applied, and I was excited you're up to talk. Like I said, we've been here at the University of Illinois before. Folks, if you recall that episode with Dr. Do-Kyung Lee, we'll probably be sitting down with him again in the future. Awesome person. And yeah, we'll be throwing that press release in the show notes. So if you guys want to check that out from the University of Illinois, it's really cool to see a school, an entity in higher education in our state leading the charge on things like this, so very exciting stuff. And till next time, am I right?
Yes, sir.
All right, folks. Well, we hope you found value in this episode of the Chillinois podcast. Once again, if you enjoy our podcast, well, it's funded by listeners like you. So just go to chillinois.net/support and you can make a contribution from there. So once again, that's chillinois.net/support. You can make a contribution of any amount to help us continue to do what we do. It costs a lot to do this. And so any amount or any support that you're able to give us is appreciated. And again, if you're not able to contribute money, Share us with your friends, your grandma, anybody. Everybody needs to listen to the Chillinois podcast. So thank you once again for listening, and we will see you next time on the Chillinois podcast.